"Get your hands off that door. The private lounge is for members only." He didn't even look up from his phone when he said it. That was the part that stayed with Darnell Osei long after everything else had settled. Not the words. The words were bad enough, but the fact that the man couldn't be bothered to make eye contact, couldn't be bothered to treat him like something worth addressing directly, that was the part that burrowed in and didn't leave. Darnell was 53 years old. He had flown into Calgary that morning on the 6:45 out of Toronto. He was wearing a charcoal wool coat that had cost him more than most people spent on a month of groceries. His carry-on was a Rimowa. His shoes were handmade. None of that should have mattered. But since we're being honest about the world we actually live in rather than the one we pretend to, it matters to say. There was nothing about Darnell that should have read as out of place in the Meridian Club private lounge at Calgary International Airport. Nothing except his face. The man blocking the door was named Curtis Halford. He was the lounge's senior member relations manager, which was a title that meant he was in charge of deciding who belonged and who didn't. He was 61, red-faced in the way of men who drink slightly too much at slightly too many corporate dinners, and he had the particular confidence of someone who had never once in his life been told that his instincts were wrong. Darnell looked at him. He had learned, over the course of his life, to do a kind of internal calculation in moments like this. He ran it now, quickly. He wasn't going to make a scene. He wasn't going to raise his voice. He was simply going to do the thing that always worked, and that never stopped feeling like a small defeat. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced his membership card, Meridian Platinum. The highest tier. The one they gave to members who had been with the club for more than 15 years, and whose annual spend crossed a threshold that Darnell did not particularly enjoy thinking about, because it reminded him that he had, at some point in his 40s, become a person who spent that kind of money on airport lounges. He held the card out. Curtis Halford glanced at it. Just glanced. Didn't reach for it, didn't examine it, barely broke stride in whatever internal monologue was running behind his eyes. "Those can be transferred," he said. "Members aren't permitted to lend their cards. I'm not lending it. It's mine." "Sir, if you'd like to speak with someone at the front desk about purchasing a day pass. I have been a member for 18 years. That landed nowhere. Curtis Halford had a gift, it turned out, for allowing information to simply slide off him without leaving a mark. "The front desk is just around the corner," he said, and he smiled in the particular way that people smile when they believe they are being patient with someone who is being unreasonable. If you've ever stood in a moment like that, in an airport, or a hotel lobby, or a conference room, or a restaurant, you know what it costs to stay calm. You know how much energy goes into keeping your voice level and your face neutral, and your hands still. People who have never had to do that work tend to assume it's easy. It is not easy. It is one of the most exhausting things a person can do. And Darnell had been doing it, in moments like this one, for 35 years. He took his card back. He put it in his pocket. He looked at Curtis Halford with an expression that revealed nothing. "Thank you," he said. "I'll sort it out." He walked to the front desk, which was staffed by a young woman named Preethi, who had the look of someone who had seen this particular situation before and was already quietly mortified. Darnell gave her his name. She typed it into the system. Whatever she saw on her screen made her go very still for a moment. "Mr. Oaf, our founding platinum members." "I know," he said. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Please let me." "It's fine," he said. "I'd just like to go in." She walked him to the door herself. Curtis Halford was still standing there. When he saw Preethi's face, something shifted in his, a small recalibration, the first faint signal that his internal compass might have been pointing in the wrong direction. "Mr. Halford," Preethi said, her voice professionally smooth, "this is Darnell Osei. He's a founding platinum member. He's also..." She paused, choosing her words with obvious care. "He's one of the club's majority stakeholders." The silence that followed was the kind that has texture to it. You could feel it in your chest. Curtis Halford's face did something complicated. It went through several expressions in rapid succession, like a man flipping through channels on a television, not finding anything he wanted to land on. Darnell did not smile. He did not say anything cutting. He simply looked at Curtis Halford, the way you look at something you're trying to decide whether to bother with. Then he walked past him into the lounge, chose a chair by the window, and ordered a coffee. He had a board meeting to prepare for. He'd wasted enough of the morning already. Now, if you're going to understand what happened next and what happened after that, you need to understand who Darnell Osei actually was. Not the version of him that Curtis Halford had assembled in his head from a 3-second glance. The real one. Darnell had grown up in Scarborough, in a house that was too small for the number of people living in it, and too cold in February, and too loud in summer with the windows open. His father, Emmanuel Osei, had come to Canada from Ghana in 1971 with 2 suitcases, a mathematics degree that Canadian employers were uninterested in, and a determination that his children would not have to explain themselves to anyone. Emmanuel had ended up driving a cab, and then buying a cab, and then buying 3 more cabs, and then pivoting, in the early 90s, into a small logistics company that moved freight between Toronto and Montreal. The company had never been large, but it had been solid and careful, and Emmanuel had run it with the kind of quiet precision that doesn't get written about in business magazines. Because it doesn't make for a good narrative. No dramatic pivots, no inspiring speeches. Just decades of showing up and doing the work. Darnell had joined the company at 26. After spending 4 years at Dalhousie studying business, and 2 more years working for a freight brokerage in Halifax, where he learned, among other things, that the people who ran the logistics industry were often not the sharpest people in any given room, and that there was a great deal of money being left on the table by companies that were too comfortable to modernize. He had ideas. His father had listened to them with the careful attention of a man who had learned that dismissing young people's ideas was a good way to stay exactly where you were. By the time Emmanuel retired, the company, still named Osei Logistics, still based in Scarborough, still run by a family who understood that their name was on the door, had grown from a 3-truck operation into a mid-sized freight network with contracts across 4 provinces. And then Darnell had done something that neither his father nor his father's friends, nor most of the industry analysts who covered the sector had expected. He'd sold it. Not because he was done. Not because he'd lost interest or run out of energy or wanted to retire at 41. He'd sold it because he'd seen, a full 4 years before the rest of the market caught up, where the industry was going, and he'd understood that the next phase wasn't going to be about who owned the trucks. It was going to be about who owned the data. He took the money from the sale, and he invested it very quietly in 3 companies. One of them went nowhere. One of them went sideways. The third one, a supply chain analytics firm based in Waterloo that nobody had heard of at the time, and that now had offices in 11 countries, had made Darnell Osei genuinely, substantially, matter-of-factly wealthy. He had used some of that wealth to do things that interested him. He sat on 2 hospital boards. He funded a scholarship program at Dalhousie. He had, 6 years ago, purchased a significant stake in the holding company that owned a portfolio of hospitality assets across Western Canada, including, among other things, the Meridian Club. He had never publicized this. He didn't see the point. The Meridian Club was a good business. He liked airport lounges. It seemed like a sensible thing to own a piece of. Curtis Halford had not known any of this when he looked at Darnell that morning and decided, in the span of a glance, that he was looking at someone who didn't belong. That was the thing about snap judgments. They felt like certainty. They moved through you with the confidence of fact, and they were with the reliability that should give everyone pause, almost always about something other than what they claimed to be about. The board meeting was held in a conference room on the 14th floor of a glass tower in downtown Calgary. It was the quarterly review for the hospitality portfolio. The kind of meeting that runs for 3 hours and covers everything from occupancy rates to capital expenditure, plans to the question of whether the renovations of the Kelowna property should be accelerated or pushed to the following fiscal year. Darnell arrived 12 minutes early, which was his habit. He poured himself a coffee from the credenza, took a seat near the middle of the table, and reviewed the materials on his tablet while the room filled. The last person to arrive, 4 minutes after the meeting was scheduled to start, was a man named Curtis Halford. He came in looking slightly rushed, slightly self-important. The way people look when they've decided that their lateness should be read as evidence of how busy they are, rather than evidence of poor time management. He was carrying a leather portfolio and wearing a suit that was slightly too formal for the occasion, which told Darnell something about how nervous he was about being in the room. It took Curtis Halford approximately 45 seconds to register that the man sitting at the conference table was the same man he had blocked from the lounge 4 hours earlier. Darnell watched it happen. He watched the recognition move across Halford's face, watched it collide with the context he was only now acquiring. The name placard, the board materials, the way the other members of the table had greeted Darnell when they came in. And he watched the resulting expression, which was something between confusion and the specific dread of a man who realizes he has made a very large mistake. Darnell said nothing. The meeting began. For the first 40 minutes, it was ordinary. Occupancy numbers, revenue per available room, a brief discussion of the Kelowna renovation timeline. Darnell asked 2 questions, both of them precise and well-informed, both of them the kind of questions that told the room he had read the materials carefully and understood the business at a level that went well beyond casual investor interest. Then they reached the agenda item labeled Member Experience and Retention. It was Halford's item. He was the one who had prepared the materials. He was the one who was supposed to present. He stood up. He clicked to his first slide. His voice, when he began, was slightly too loud, the way voices get when the person speaking them is working very hard at projecting confidence they don't entirely feel. Member satisfaction scores for Q1 were strong, he began. We've implemented several new protocols around entry verification, and can we talk about the incident this morning? Who was the board's chair and who had the calm, direct manner of someone who had not gotten where she was by avoiding uncomfortable conversations. Halford stopped. I'm sorry. The incident at the lounge this morning, at the airport. Beverly Drummond looked around the table, then looked at Darnell. We received a report from the front desk staff. Halford's face had gone a particular shade that Darnell recognized. It was the shade of a man doing frantic internal accounting, trying to work out how much the people in the room knew and whether there was any version of events he could offer that would land favorably. There was a brief miscommunication, Halford said. I wasn't aware. You asked a founding platinum member to go to the front desk to purchase a day pass, Beverly Drummond said. Her voice was entirely pleasant. This, Darnell had learned, was how she operated. The pleasantness was the point. I didn't recognize. What didn't you recognize? A pause. A long one. His membership status, Halford said, finally. His membership card was visible. Preeti had noted in the report she'd filed that morning. She was not in the room, but her words were. The silence at the table was not hostile, exactly. It was more like the silence of people who understood what was actually being discussed and were waiting, with interest, to see how it would resolve. Darnell took a sip of his coffee. He had not said a word. He didn't need to. Mr. O.C., Beverly Drummond said, is there anything you'd like to add? Darnell set his cup down. He looked at Halford, who was still standing at the front of the room, next to his presentation about member satisfaction scores. No, Darnell said. I think the situation's been described accurately. Is there anything the board should know that isn't in the report? Darnell thought about it. He thought about the way Halford had not looked up from his phone. He thought about the smile, the patient smile. The smile that said, I am being very reasonable with someone who is being unreasonable. He didn't look at me, Darnell said. When he told me I couldn't go in, he looked at his phone. He didn't look at me until the 3rd time I spoke. The room absorbed this. I see, said Beverly Drummond. She thanked Halford for his presentation. She told him they'd circle back to the member experience agenda item after a short break. She said it in the same pleasant, direct voice. Curtis Halford sat down. He was asked to leave the room during the portion of the meeting that concerned his role. Darnell stayed. He was not the one who moved to terminate Halford's contract. That was Beverly Drummond, who had been watching member complaint data for 2 quarters and had been waiting, Darnell suspected, for the right moment to address what the data was telling her. She made the motion crisply and without drama. Another board member seconded it. The vote was not close. Darnell abstained. He'd thought about it on the flight from Toronto, in the quiet half-hour after the runway lights of Pearson had disappeared beneath the clouds. He'd decided before the plane landed that he wouldn't vote. Not because he felt any particular mercy toward Curtis Halford. He didn't, especially. It was more that he didn't want the ending of this story to be about his power. He didn't want the lesson to be, "This matters because of who I am." It mattered because of what happened. It would have mattered if he'd been anyone. He knew that was idealistic. He knew that, in practice, it mattered because of who he was. He was not naive about the world he lived in, but he could at least decline to be the instrument of it. That was the small, careful line he drew. After the meeting, he walked back to the airport. His flight to Vancouver wasn't until 5, and there were materials he wanted to review. He went back to the Meridian Club. He showed his card at the door. A different staff member this time, a young man who glanced at it, smiled, and held the door open without ceremony. Darnell chose the same chair by the window. He ordered the same coffee. He thought about his father. He thought about Emmanuel Osei, who had driven a cab in February in Toronto, and had never, as far as Darnell could recall, let anyone see how much that cost him. Who had come home and eaten dinner, and helped with homework, and gone to bed, and gotten up and done it again. He thought about what his father had told him once, a Sunday afternoon in the kitchen in Scarborough, when Darnell was maybe 15 and furious about something he couldn't even remember now. "People are always going to see what they expect to see," his father had said. "Your job is not to change what they expect. Your job is to know what you are." He had not fully understood it at 15. He understood it better now. He opened his tablet. He had a call at 2 with the Waterloo team. Quarterly numbers, product roadmap, the usual. Outside the window, planes were moving slowly across the tarmac in the flat gray light of an Alberta morning, and the city spread out beyond the perimeter in every direction, low and wide and ordinary. 3 weeks after the Calgary meeting, Darnell received a letter. It was a formal letter, the kind typed on actual paper and sent through actual mail, which was unusual enough in 2026 that he noticed it sitting on his desk before he noticed anything else in the pile. It was from Curtis Halford. He was standing at his desk, coat still on, the letter held in both hands. It was not, to his mild surprise, defensive. It did not explain or justify or argue. It was simply an apology. It said, "I made an assumption that morning. I know what the assumption was based on. I know that knowing that doesn't undo it. I'm writing because I thought you deserved to hear it said plainly, without me trying to make it easier for myself by softening the edges." Darnell read it twice. He set it on his desk. He took off his coat. He sat down and looked at the letter for a moment longer. He thought about writing back. He drafted the response in his head, a sentence or two, something that acknowledged the letter, without offering absolution he hadn't been asked for. He wasn't sure absolution was his to give. He wasn't sure it was the point. In the end, he filed the letter in a folder he kept for correspondence he wasn't ready to throw away, but didn't know quite what to do with. He thought about it sometimes, in the months after. Not often, but sometimes. What he thought mostly was this, that there are two kinds of people in the world, not good and bad, not guilty and innocent, not the ones who get it and the ones who don't. It was more like this: there are people who, when they are wrong, find a way to stay wrong forever by never quite looking at it directly. And there are people who look at it, who pick it up and turn it over and say, out loud to the person they wronged, "Here is what I did. Here is what it was." The second kind is rarer than it should be. Darnell was not sure what to do with that. He was not sure what it changed, or whether it changed anything, or whether change was even the right frame. He went back to work. He had a call at 9. He had a board packet to review before lunch. He had, in 2 weeks, a trip to Halifax for a Dalhousie alumni dinner, at which he would shake a lot of hands and eat mediocre chicken and feel, as he always did at those events, the complicated mix of pride in where you started. That came with being very far from where you started. His father would have thought the whole thing was slightly ridiculous. Emmanuel Osi had never been particularly impressed by rooms full of important people. He had known too many of them to be impressed. Darnell smiled, a small one, at his desk, with no one to see it. He dialed into the 9 o'clock. Outside his window, Toronto was doing what Toronto always did in April, trying to decide between winter and spring, committing to neither, making everyone wait. He had learned to wait. He had learned a lot of things. The call connected. He said, "Good morning." He got to work.